Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, where we bring you ideas, experiences, and best practices from the real estate development industry. My name is Payam Noursalehi, and I'm your host here. This episode is a little bit different. I actually don't have any guests for this episode, and I thought that I would take this opportunity and share some of my personal experiences and insights, having worked with a lot of different projects throughout the years and a lot of different systems throughout the years, and share some insights, share ideas. And the topic that I wanted to talk to you guys about in this episode was about changes, basically. It's about changes and how, or maybe a better word would be adapting, how we need to adapt to the new realities of the industry that we work in, we live and breathe in, which has to do with the development of buildings and building buildings. That's the ultimate goals, and that's the purpose of what we do. The idea came about because we recently started a series of webinars, the first one of which was not too long ago in March of 2025, where we started exploring new systems and new products and new building methods through the work that we do on our website on midrise.ca. And it got me thinking. Over the years, I've had the opportunity of working with many different systems, and each of them have their own pros and cons. And I thought it would be good to sit down, create a framework, create some sort of a decision-making process to decide or evaluate or go about looking at different systems, either new or very common and established systems and solutions in the industry. What are the things you should be wary of, things that you should be paying more attention to? And that's the topic of this discussion. If you're interested, if you're an engineer, developer, architect, I think there will be some points for you to take away from this conversation. And if that's something that you find useful, and if you like our content here, please, as always, make sure to subscribe to the show and tell others about us. Let others know that we're doing this and we're creating content here, and hopefully we can help more people. Let's start and dive into the conversation. At the end of the day, we as an industry in Canada, and probably for the most part for the North America, despite all the politics and economic situations that are going on right now for the moment, which may or may not last for the foreseeable future, we have been doing things a certain way, and it has brought us some challenges. The challenges, they have many names. You call them housing crisis, call them affordability crisis, call them sustainability crisis and climate change, whatever you want to call them, because all of them have their traces or have some traces in the development and of the new buildings, the way the construction works. And with that said, I want to start by this quote from Albert Einstein, where he defines insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Why do I say that? Because our industry, the construction industry, the real estate development industry, is a very old dog, that probably for good reason. And that doesn't mean we cannot change, we cannot improve, or we cannot innovate. We need more buildings. The population, at least in this part of the world, is growing, and the forecast is that it's going to even grow even further. By looking at all of the numbers, you can always see that there's a gap between the supply of housing, especially, and all sorts of building, but in very particular topic on the housing side, the supply is far behind what it needs to be, or at least where experts think they need to be. That's a whole different discussion. Compared to where we are right now, the rate that we're building these buildings is not fast enough. And there's also the fact that many of these buildings that we're building, or many of the construction methods that we've been using, are somewhat antiquated. And again, I don't say that in a bad way, because I believe, and I'm going to get to that point later on, that construction of all industries needs to have some degree of lag just because of the nature of the work. But we're not building buildings that are sustainable. So we need more buildings, we need more sustainable buildings, and we need to find more efficiencies in building these sustainable buildings of the future, particularly homes and houses. And we believe that we need more entrepreneurs, investors, and creative people, smart people, to come to the housing industry, to the real estate development industry, and try to pull some of the weight, try to solve some of the problems. And all of this, it has started showing itself. Meaning, over the past, say, 5 years, I've personally had the opportunity of witnessing and working with some of the new and innovative systems that are out there. People are taking their engineering knowledge, putting it to work, and trying to come up with a new concept, come up with a new product, or an entirely new system for that matter in some cases. And not all of them are created equal. There are systems that are more viable than the others. I can tell you over the past at least 2 years, I have probably reviewed and studied to some extent a dozen or more of these systems or ways of building buildings, and each of them has or holds a lot of promise. Which ones are going to be lasting and which ones are going to be successful in this market and in the industry, yet to be seen. But in this episode, as I mentioned, we're going to try and go through some of the topics and some of the criteria that you want to think about when looking at these new systems. With that said, let's break it down. Why are we having issues? At least part of the reasons that we're having issues these days is you have the labor cost, which is going up. And I don't say it as a bad thing. That's just a reality of what it is. The cost of living goes up. The people who work in the trade need to keep a certain quality of life, standard of living. That means that the cost of the inflation will affect them. The labor costs will go up. But one thing that is exaggerating or exacerbating that situation is that we're not having as many people as before entering the workforce, which means the labor workforce is getting older. The more experienced people are harder to come by, and the ones that are working are going to retire in the next 5-10 years probably, which means that in the very near future, we're going to have issues with lack of labor. That being said, I think in one of the episodes, probably episode 10, that we had Dr. Murtaza Haider on the podcast, we talked about that these days, building a building requires way more labor per project than it used to have, because it's just getting more complicated. There are more requirements, and perhaps because we're losing some efficiency to the type of labor we're using, and maybe the people on job sites are not as experienced in some cases as they used to be on an average compared to, let's say, 2 or 3 decades ago. The complexity of the projects are going up. I believe that what we're building today as a product on its own is a better product than it used to be 50 years ago in terms of the thermal performances, acoustic performances, even sustainability for that matter. And that's an arguable discussion. At large, you can say that we're doing a better job, we're delivering a better product. That being said, the construction process is taking way longer than it should. And that has cost, that creates inefficiencies. And it seems like prefabrication, modular construction, and a hybrid method of construction or hybrid systems in buildings is going to be at least a good chunk of the solution for future buildings. And when you think about all of those, the benefits come from mainly repetitive processes, controlled environments, and less or fewer human errors in the process that can be detected earlier and fixed. And as much as there are all very good promises, there are still very real practical issues and obstacles in the way of getting all those things lined up to use them on a mass scale. There's a difference between doing something once in one particular project because you have all the parts moving in the right direction. There are many different entities that are pushing forward, and doing that on scale, bringing a technology to a level that every developer, any construction building can use it. Bridge that gap, we need a lot more push. I want to start going into the framework that I want to introduce to you guys in this episode. I do have a big disclaimer. I will not pretend that I know all the systems, all the construction methods out there. I don't. My strong suit and my personal experience has been around structural systems and envelope systems in the building. One could argue that combined, the two of them together will comprise somewhere indirectly or directly around 50 to 60% of your cost of building a building, because your choice of structure affects how you get your performances, how you use your drywall, how you use your windows on the cladding, how you connect different things. So I want to say I have at least enough experience to talk about 50% of what goes into building a project. I'm not necessarily experienced enough to be able to comment on the mechanical systems particularly. And the majority of the building pieces, frankly, can be affected by the other 2 or 3 elements that we just talked about. So that's one disclaimer. The second disclaimer is this is not a full education semester worth of content in this episode because, frankly, I don't have it. I've been pursuing and chasing the knowledge of how to pick and select suitable systems for different projects for the past 20 odd years. And I can tell you that I still have a long way ahead of myself. So take it with a grain of salt, whatever I'm telling you. This is the framework I'm using. Hopefully you find some value. Before I get to the particulars of the framework that I personally use when I look at a new product or a new system, it's very important to note that not all projects or systems are created equal. Meaning, if you're building a house, single-family detached house, there's pretty much no way you're going to beat the proven way of building it with 2x4 stick frame wood building material. If I want to argue here, that's not something that's going to be scalable. You can do one-offs, you can do portfolio projects that for people to see that it's feasible. I'm not saying it's not feasible, but it's not realistic to say that we can, at least I don't know of, please, if you know, by all means, write to us and educate me a little bit more, that I don't think at the current situation, at least in Canada or perhaps in North America, you can compete with lumber and stick framing for detached houses or basically single family dwellings, low rise, 1 to 2 floors, maybe 3. It's really hard to go there. And also on the other end of the spectrum, if you're building a 40-story building, 20-story building, even for that matter, maybe 16, 17, 18-story building, it's really, really, really hard to gain enough efficiency and performance of anything other than cast-in-place concrete or CIP. I'm admitting that there are limitations that you cannot innovate. When you go to a 40-story building, if you want to build it with something other than concrete, you're taking on a challenge. That's the truth. And it's definitely doable, but it's challenging. And that's not what we're going to talk about in this episode. My goal is to try and narrow down to bring it to a scale that we can replicate. We can have multiple projects built with. So if you have a 20-story building, you might not find too much value in this episode. And if you're building houses, probably the same thing. You are very much set. You can probably innovate a little bit around the edges, but at least as far as I'm aware, there's no major groundbreaking innovation that would take over the industry by storm in the next 5-10 years. That being said, there's a lot of ground to be covered between a single-family house and a 20-story concrete building. It's mostly known as mid-rise buildings. And the beauty of the mid-rise building, the one thing that I personally particularly love about it is that because of its characteristics and features, it allows you to mix and match, use different products, use different systems, mix and match them, pick a column system from this manufacturer and mix it with a floor system from the other manufacturer and still get your performance and probably do better if you had bought the whole thing from one individual. Okay, here's a warning. Do not buy a solution that doesn't solve a problem. I'll say that again. Sounds stupid, but it's not. Do not buy a solution that does not solve a problem. With all due respect to all of my good friends and whoever is working in the R&D departments and universities and research institutes, please keep up the good work you're doing. That being said, me as a construction manager, as a development manager, as a developer, when I'm looking at a new system, I need to buy something that solves the problem. Just because something is bright and shiny does not necessarily work. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Believe it or not, as much as we're all smart people, the number of times we've witnessed people coming up with solutions that doesn't necessarily solve a particular problem, it's more than I'd like it to be. And what do I mean by that? If you see a new system, new product, new way of building something, or new material, try to ask them to, whoever's pitching you the idea, the system, ask them to summarize it and explain it to a second-year student of engineering or architecture, someone has slightly technical knowledge. Ask them to explain the benefit of the system to them in 2 paragraphs. 2 paragraphs. And if they can't, if they give you all the spiel, which is 40 pages, probably they're not clear on what they're selling you, and you shouldn't buy that. That's my rule. That's my rule. And the other way of getting to that answer is ask them why 3 times in a row. You should buy this product. Why? Then they'll give you an answer, and then they'll go through that answer and say, okay, why? 3 times. Trust me, if you ask 3 times in a row, why is that? Whatever the reason is. My guess is that at some point in time, you're going to realize that this is not really clear. And why is this important? Because if it's not clear, or it cannot be made clear very easily up front, what is the benefit you're getting? And if there's lots of ifs and buts and other factors at play, it will not be simple enough to be able to scale it or copy it or replicate it in different projects. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people and stakeholders involved in any construction project. And to be able to communicate the message of a new way of doing things into the entire stakeholder community involved in that project, it's not an easy task. It needs to be very clear. Why are we doing this? Why are we using this material? Why are we using this forming system? Why are we using that column? Just because that column looks better, it's not a good enough reason. You can use it, you can pay for it, but don't expect it to become replicable, because the next time your budget is tight, you will throw it away because you were only using it for the looks. So that's a very important part. This happens in tech sector way more than in construction, I think. But many smart people that I've witnessed or have had the opportunity of working with fall in the trap of creating a solution for a problem that does not exist. And we don't want to be buying for that. We don't want to waste the project's precious dollars in doing R&D and paying for research. So that's, at least that's where I stand at this point in time. And another way of looking at this is this new system or product, is it going to create efficiency in my project? And if it is, for someone who's going to be willing to pay for it, you need to understand how and where that efficiency is coming from. If you want to use system A, and I'm really trying hard not to name particular products or systems in this podcast because I want to keep it as broad as possible. But if you're using system A, and someone comes along and say, listen, we've looked at this other system B, and it looks really promising, let's do that. Let's use that product or that system or that manufacturing and building. The first question I'm going to ask is, why? What is it replacing? How is it? And it's not enough just to say it's more efficient, goes faster. Okay, walk me through the steps. Why? Again, ask the question 3 times. Why? Why is it faster? How are you achieving that? Because a lot of these things, at least in my experience, when you start digging, there's something there that you not intentionally, it's not like you're not being presented or being lied to. Most of the times, it hasn't been implemented enough times to know what are the issues. With all that said, am I against innovation? Absolutely not. I love innovation. I believe in that what we need is new systems, new ways of doing this. But there's a big but. We have limited resources in the construction industry. The projects are very hard to make work for small investors. We don't have money to waste. That's the whole point. So if you're making a choice, if you want to try something new, I would really prefer that you do that with a very open eye and you know what you're getting yourself into. So that's the whole purpose of what we're talking about. And one of the ways you can look at minimizing the downside of using a new system in your building is look at the systematic risk that comes with any new system or any, not even new. It could be a common way of doing things or common building material or common building structure, but a new mix, a new way of doing it. The who is often, if you've ever watched Shark Tank or Dragon's Den or some version of that, you're going to have heard that question, that what's your resume? What have you done before? Have you ever done this before? Is there a proven track record? The lessons that can be learned through one full construction cycle is way more than some people estimate, and is way more than 5 years of R&D research in the lab. And that's not because people are not smart enough. That's because we are in the business of making a million critical but small decisions. As a builder, as a construction manager, as a developer, the only thing you do is to make decisions. And these decisions are not very big. You have to make them probably dozens, if not hundreds of them every single day. You just don't know which ones you're missing right now when you try something new. So please put a lot of emphasis on a team behind it. And how would I suggest you go about that? I have no issues with new products. I love new products as long as they can withstand this process that we're going through right now. New teams are more dangerous than new products. If you go toward the product that is coming from established manufacturer, established service provider, who's been doing something for 20 years, now they're trying to branch to a new product, new line of systems or new elements. That to me is 10 times better than going to someone who has a new team, but perhaps an old idea, proven idea. Because construction is a long process. Development is an even longer process. And it's not just the 2 years that you're in the ground building something, or 1 or 2 years before that you're designing something. That's merely 5% of the whole thing. It's the 50 or 100 years after you've built the building that the building needs to sit there and it needs to work. And the people who live and use that building need to be able to rely on what you put there today to enjoy it. Otherwise, it's a fruitless exercise. We're building something to last, so we need to make sure the team who's doing this also has the same mentality and has the backbone. So am I ruling out any startups or new joint ventures that are forming to go after a new product? No. My suggestion is that if you have a product that, let's say hypothetically, it's a cladding product for the face of the building, go pair up with an established cladding company that has a backbone, has a know-how of how do you hook the crane to this corner and tilt it such that it doesn't swing to the other building. These are very minor examples, but they will have impact on how you build a building. These are things that most people don't think up front when planning for a new system, new product. Last but not least, when it comes to systems and risk, make allowances for your unknown unknowns. When we build a building with very well-known systems, with concrete or steel or wood, and I'm not talking about mass timber, I'm talking stick frame wood, there are uncertainties. You carry contingencies for them. You make allowances. But if you're using something that has never been used, or not that often, or not in that application that you're using, there will be unknown unknowns. So make extra allowances. If your performance still works, perfect. You're the perfect pioneer. And as a friend of mine says, pioneers typically end up with arrows in the back, but they've established a legacy. So that's it on the risk. Next topic is project definition. And the best way I can go about explaining this is that it's not efficient, or it's not the right way, at least in my opinion, to design a building, let's say, for a concrete structure, and then go, because your budget doesn't work, or you can't get a concrete guy on time, or the forming crew is not available, and go and change a building that was designed to be built with concrete. And just at the permit level, or toward the very midway down the design development phase, change it and say, you know what, we're going to do this steel, or we're going to do this in wood, or we're going to do this in mass timber, or you name it, or we're going to use a hybrid system. This will not work in your favor. Each of these systems, and I'm talking about particularly structure here, I told you, I warned you, I know more about the structure than anything else. So any of these systems have their own unique requirements, characteristics, and sweet spots. They can meet the code, they can meet your performance requirements, but there's a sweet spot to designing a mass timber building versus a steel structure building versus a cast-in-place concrete building. It's a function of your layouts, it's a function of your floor plans, it's a function of your site logistics. Very big item, and I'm surprised how many projects we look at that very late in the game, the whole site logistic discussion comes into play. That's a whole, maybe we do another episode on the site logistics because it's a very big topic. The project definition needs to happen early on. If you're going to use a system that's going to majorly affect, like this structure, 30%, 40% of the entire budget of that project, you better get involved in that conversation very early on, as early as possible, because that's going to dictate how long should your bays be, each bay, and what sequence you go about. How do you lift and place different pieces in the building? And it's also dependent on the cost. So the system will cost you individually on a paper, and I cannot emphasize this enough. There are systems that when you ask for a price, okay, what's your square foot? I think it was Blair Davies on episode 4 of this podcast who mentioned that he always gets asked, what's your square foot cost? And he said, I hate that question. And I agree with him because it's very hard to put a number to an overall cost. It's easy to give you an upfront cost. If you ask someone the cost of a stick frame building versus a CFS building on a 4-story or 5-story building, let's say, it's very easy to tell you how much the stick frame will cost you ahead of time and give you a quotation and engage the stick frame contractor or panelizer. But it's really hard to gauge and quantify the overall cost of or cost difference of using the two systems. The amount of delays you might get on site, the amount of issues you might have with waterproofing, fire ratings, acoustic performance. And if you want to know more about that, go to episode we did with Dave DeCourt, and we dive into that, and he gives a whole bunch of examples. So cost, be careful, please. Be careful. Don't be sold on something that looks cheap day one and without fully appreciating the implications on your entire performa. Many of these new systems are not tested enough. Again, this is the function of a time period and repeatability of these systems, because the more you repeat them, the more you learn, the more you debug the system. It's like your iPhone updating every so often because they're fixing the bugs that the previous revision had. But if you don't have enough options, or if you haven't had the opportunity to repeat your project or your manufacturing process enough times, you still have a lot of bugs in the system. I think that's the simplest way I can put it. So you've decided on the definition of the project. You're building an 8-story building. You want to use CFS building with a hollow core slab, concrete precast hollow core slab. And this is just an example. The next phase of things, or the next category of things to think about, is your team, because you're going to have to go through extensive design development. Make sure your design team, your consultant team, at least has experience. They might not be the best or the experts, or they haven't done dozens, but at least they have some experience or a lot of willingness. If they don't have the experience, they have to have a lot of willingness to work at a discounted rate to learn on this new system that you want to use. For them, at least, it might be new for them. And give them enough time. Make sure they have enough allowances in their budget or at their own cost to be able to learn how to use that system on your project. What you don't want to happen is you don't want to have a design set of drawings on site where, because of your design team's inexperience with the system, you end up with 150 site instructions and change orders that will cost you an arm and a leg to finish the job. Or your design development, instead of 3 months or 6 months, 2 years long to finish because people are learning as much. So that's a very important piece. New systems have learning curves, and we're not good at learning curves. As an industry, we're suspicious. We're suspicious. I think that's the best word. Because we're not dumb, we're smart. A lot of smart people in the industry that can learn fast. They're just suspicious of how much learning they want to do for something that's new. The other question to ask is, how flexible is this new system? Do I have limitations? Or what are my limitations? Hey everyone, Payam here. Just a quick announcement before we go back to the rest of the interview. We have been working on something new at midrise.ca. For those of you who have followed my work throughout the years, you know that I'm very passionate about the mid-rise buildings and the part that they can play in solving our housing crisis issues in Toronto and in Canada. And I've had the good fortune and opportunity of working on a number of different mid-rise buildings and study a whole bunch of different systems that work for these buildings, the pros and cons of each system, how they affect the schedule, how they affect the cost, how they affect the performance of each building, and what stages they need to kick in. We have started a new webinar series. It's called Mid-Rise Building Solutions. And we plan to present and review some of the systems that hold the most promise for the mid-rise building typology in each webinar. If you want to learn more, these are all free resources. Please go to our website, midrise.ca. That's mid-rise.ca. And again, thank you for your support. Do I care about the crane capacity? Do I need to worry about picking up a piece from one corner and moving it to the other? Do I need 2 cranes to build that building? Do I need to worry about sizes of or proximity of washrooms? If I have two back-to-back washrooms in my floor plan, is that going to cause me an issue? And I guess, long story short, how does this new solution or system work with other building elements? Because at the end of the day, here's another important takeaway. Please, 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 organizations have limited capacity for change at any point in time. Look at a construction project as an organization. We can work with change. We're smart enough to be able to use new things. But there's only so much change that you can inject or push into a project at any point in time without having to deal with the backlash. Too much change in a project all at once is a recipe for disaster. Please be careful. If you're a repeat builder, I would try and spread those innovations and changes over multiple projects. If you're a one-off builder, you're probably better off limiting very much the amount of innovation that you're incorporating into your project, or be cognizant of the fact that halfway through the design, you might, or even, God forbid, in construction, you're going to have some very big surprises come up, which you were not expecting. Obviously, you're always going to ask about the performance requirements. Is it going to give me the acoustic? Is it going to give me the thermal value? Is it going to give me the fire rating? Is it going to have the sustainability requirements that we would have? These days, especially these days, with everything that we see around us, from wildfires to floods to changes in the climate, sustainability is a very big factor. It's not a joke anymore. It's not something you just say. We need to, as a whole, as an industry, we need to start incorporating it into every decision that we make. And it might take a while. It will not be fast. I've been trying for the past couple of years, and it's not easy. But a lot of entities out there are making decisions based on sustainability and how good we treat our planet. So those are the questions that I would assume that you would ask before you go through that. The other part of the framework would be around the approval process. We have to appreciate that municipalities, authorities, for safety authorities, for example, in Toronto, we deal with TSSA, with City of Toronto, with fire marshals. These systems are there to govern, and by their nature are risk averse. We want them to be risk averse. You don't want a fire marshal to be a risky person. You don't want them to be taking risks for the safety of your building. And that's a good thing. Knowing that, if you're using a new product, or if you're deciding to go with a new system for your building, please make sure you understand what are the requirements you need to meet for those risk-averse entities or authorities having jurisdiction in your area. What are the requirements? How can you meet them? Need to be proactive about that. Need to bring them to the table. And believe it or not, a lot of them would like to work with you on a new system, new product, new way of doing things, but they also need to make sure you're covering your bases. So that's a whole process. Allow for time to deal with that. Allow for budget to deal with that. You might have to go and get some testing, certifications, transfer something from a European standard to Canadian standard, something of that matter. So allow for that. Know what you're getting into. Again, if the product or system that you're looking at has done this before, you're halfway there or more than halfway there. If you're using something for the first time, if you're importing a product bright and shiny from Germany and you want to incorporate it in your product, it might be more challenging than you think. And it might cost you way more than what you're paying in Germany just to bring it over. So it's good to know this ahead of time, plan for it, allow for the timeline, and make sure you have all your ducks in a row before you pull the trigger. The other item that we need to talk about is procurement. Just buying a good product, or even product and installation. Sometimes you buy the product itself, sometimes you buy a system, meaning it comes, they come and install it. You need to understand how will this affect everyone else that works on the project, either on the design side or on the construction side. Because if I'm a roofer and I need to touch that product, whatever that product is, a membrane or a window or a cladding membrane or anyone else whose work will get affected by your choice of that system or material, if they don't know enough about the system, which by definition, if you're bringing in a new system, if you're looking at innovation, they wouldn't. They will have to, if they're wise, they will have to create buffers for themselves when they price the job. Meaning, If something typically costs $10 a square foot to do on a typical construction building, it might cost $12 or $13 on a new system just because people don't know what they're dealing with. They don't have the efficiencies in place. And they will have their own learning curve at the end of the day. And learning curves means more cost, more money, more potential for error. So make sure whatever you're doing, allow for that. And also, it would be very good if you can train people. And if you believe in the product or the system, train people to work with it. Don't be surprised that when you go to pricing and doing your budget, when you find out that, now everyone who's going to touch or be affected by this new system or technology is going to be a little bit weary and is going to be a little bit scared. So they have their guards up. And this also goes for your consultants. This goes for advisors and designers. The amount of time they might take to review something, scrutinize something, go through the details and information, it might be double, triple what they're used to on a typical building that they've done hundreds of. These are all the things you want to consider when you go to a new system. And one very important thing, if you're going with a system that is proprietary to a single manufacturer, at least in your region, be careful with lead times. Be careful with alternatives. Unfortunately, we've had cases not too far in the past that the suppliers have gone upside down financially. The system didn't work. They couldn't run the company. And there were a whole bunch of projects out there that were sold that particular product, and I don't want to name names. And they had to switch halfway through the project because that particular manufacturer suppliers couldn't provide what they had to. Or they couldn't provide for another 12 months, which means you're building the building, you're sitting there, and you're going to have a site that sits there with nothing because for whatever reason, one portion of the project has a very long lead time now. They're running into issue into production or supply chain, and which always know happened during COVID. And you don't have any other option. It's not like you can go to Home Depot and pick up another piece of 2x4 and replace it. You've married, and this is a very big part. Proprietary systems and innovative systems are very good at certain things. One very big risk that comes with it is you're typically bound to a single source. Single sourcing any element of a construction project is a risky process. It's a risky endeavor. So please be careful. Go back, go listen a little bit further back. It has to do with who's behind the product more than the product itself. To me, that's a very important piece. When it comes to construction, obviously the very first question that comes to mind is how much does it cost? The second question, which is a corollary of this first question, is how long does it take? Is it faster? There are lots of products out there right now that are promising that are going to cut your construction timing in half. Some of them do, some of them don't. And if that's the case, you need to understand how that speed up is being achieved. I'm not saying it can't be done. I have been part of projects that were very fast. We used new systems and it really worked. I was surprised too. It was a pleasant surprise, but they really did work. So you just need to understand what you're getting for. One question that sometimes gets missed is how does your QA or QC system work? Meaning quality assurance, QC quality control. How do I know the product that's going to show up on site has not been damaged in your factory, on your cargo ship, on your trailer, in your packaging system, or your storage before it got to my ship? So that's all QA per se. What process do you have in place? So I can make sure when something shows up on my construction site, it's not damaged. So when you talk about something like a precast piece of concrete, it's very easy to see. Or it's easier to see than something that's complex, like a machine or even a window system that might have a tiny crack somewhere or a loose gasket or something. So QA, and also once you put it in place, how do we make sure it's actually doing what's supposed to be doing? How do we make sure we're getting the performance that we're supposed to get from that particular product or solution once it's installed? So that's a big part of this discussion, because unless you're getting the benefits that you were promised, or at least not all of them, if you're not getting all of the promises, then your endeavor was not very fruitful. Are we adding, by using this new system, by using this new product, are we adding to the things that can go wrong on the job site or deducting from them? I want to put on my construction hat for a second. Construction job sites are by definition, a very risky place and a very risky phase in any development project. Anything that can help us reduce the number of things that can go wrong on the job site is more than welcomed. I would fight for it. But if you bring me something that by nature is very vulnerable, or if it's not done 100% right, and then it causes a massive backlash or a problem on the job site, I want to avoid it like plague, because things will go wrong on construction sites. Things will not work out. I believe Raymond Van Grohl in episode 11 talked about this. When you draw something in AutoCAD or BIM or Revit or whatever software you're using, you can go probably to millimeters. Construction sites don't work like that, or at least not all of construction sites work like that. I know you can make them work as close to perfect as possible. But again, go back to the principle of replicability and being able to do things at scale. All that to say, if you're introducing a system that needs everything else to be perfect for it to work, you're signing up for disaster. Things will not be perfect. And trust me, as someone who started as an engineer in his career, took me a while to realize how engineering side of things, when you add 2 and 2 is always 4, is not the same as what happens on a job site, where things can be maybe 2 and 2 add up to 3.5 or 4.5. And so that's one of the major things to take into account. And then after construction or after something has been installed, let's call it the post-construction. If you have ever been on a job site, you know that there are deficiencies. How do you fix a deficiency? This is one of the questions that I typically end up struggling with or challenging people with who are proposing new systems. If you're only designing a product or a system to be able to go up perfectly and installed once, and you haven't really thought through, or you don't know how you're going to fix something. If there's a gasket that needs to be replaced, how do you replace a gasket? You need to bring a tower crane and bring the whole thing down, put it on a flatbed, have the unit open for half a day or a full day, and then put it back one by one, which is going to cost a fortune? Or is it as simple as opening half a dozen screws on the panel, replacing something, or adding caulking or glue or whatever, and going back? Like, you need to know your potential failure points of the systems and how you're going to fix it. Otherwise, again, you're just taking on that extra risk that when we talked about the risk at the beginning of the episode, and you're just exponentially increasing your risk profile on the job. Not something you want to do. Can it be easily repaired? Does it? And the other part is going back to the entity behind it. You see how often this comes up. Is the entity who's selling you this product or solution strong enough to, within reason, that you can assume that they're going to be around 5-10 years from now? Because we build buildings technically for eternity. We don't build buildings to be done in 5 years or like your iPhone in 18 months. We build buildings for them to last a lifetime or even more, multiple lifetimes. I don't expect any company to last multiple lifetimes. There are a few of them out there. But within reason, if something goes wrong, can it be repaired? Can it be replaced? Or at some point, you're just into a massive problem that no one knows how to fix. Can happen easier than you think. So please be careful with that. And I guess last but not least, think about the operation of the building. You build a building for 2 years, 3 years, maybe 4 years if it's a very large project. But that building, again, is going to sit there for 50, 100 years. So operation is, and using that building, that project is far larger portion of the overall life cycle of the project, of a building, than building it. So as much as we can, a lot of things can go wrong and might go wrong during construction and design, and you can control it. They don't compare to the experience of living, the productivity of a building, and after construction costs of operating a building. So this is where going back to what I said earlier, the whole thing with an old dog and new trick comes in handy. Many of the things that you see in the business right now, in the industry and the construction projects, have been around for a long time. They've passed their test of time. People feel comfortable that if this type of shingle works, it typically works 10 years. I know in 10 years I need to replace it. I know how to repair it. not personally, but I know who to find. There are people, it's easy enough, it's common enough. Make sure if you're doing that, whether it's a cladding product, it's a roofing product, if it's a mechanical product, if this thing goes wrong. I remember I think it was up episode number 3 even, we talked with Kara Sloat about geothermal systems and geo-exchange systems, and I asked her the same question. You use the geothermal system in a building. What if one of your wells or multiple wells go wrong? What somehow they die, a pipe breaks, something leaks. Is your building is going to be in trouble? And she obviously answered no, and she walked us through why and how you can prevent and predict, and or if it happens, you can mitigate the effects of it. So it's very important to think about that. You don't want to end up in a situation, and I know, unfortunately, we've talked about bathtubing the basements in the state of Toronto, making them watertight. Something like that, unfortunately, will fail at some point in time, and we're going to have a whole bunch of issues. That's a full other episode. But make sure whatever we're doing, think about the long term, think about the entire life cycle of the building, and I think that's pretty much it. So at the end of the day, we need new technologies, we need innovations, we need mix and match of existing technology to be able to build better buildings, more sustainable buildings, more affordable buildings, and solve some problems. It's not about chasing trends. Just because something is flashy today may or may not be a good reason to do it. We want to stay away from unproven risks, stay away from or go closer to people and entities with proven track records. Make sure you understand the hidden costs. I cannot emphasize this enough. Upfront cost versus final cost. And the difference of the two would be the hidden costs, which you don't know day one. It's a very important topic. And it's not, unfortunately, unless you're a repeat builder or a repeat developer, you probably have not been privy to the impact of that. So be careful with that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think this went on a little bit longer than I thought it would. I hope that you have found some of these thoughts useful. I have created a checklist, a PDF checklist based on this episode, one pager, which you can download from our website. Go to midrise.ca/downloads, and you can download the PDF version there. It's a checklist for your future. Next time you want to define a project, you want to design a project, here's a checklist you can use just to make sure you've covered your bases as much as possible. There's always unknowns that none of us knows about. But as much as possible, it can act as a guide, as a framework, and I hope you found this useful. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast, and please tell everyone else about it. If you knew anyone in your network that might enjoy this episode or any other episodes, please refer us to them or refer them to us, I think is a better way of saying it. And yeah, thank you. Have a great one.
Just one last thing before you leave. We've created a document called Real Estate Development Toolbox, which you can download for free from our website at realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. This document is basically the result of us asking our network and our listeners, what is a top tool that you use on a daily basis to keep yourself aware of information that's going on in the industry, the changes, the trends, the technologies, the regulations, and or if you with the tools that you use to make sure that you deliver quality results to your clients and customers, the tools that help you with productivity in what you do, and also any softwares, specialized softwares that you think are useful to share with others. So if you think there are resources that you're using on a daily basis and you would like others to know about them, please make sure to let us know, and we will make sure to include it in the next iteration of this toolbox. Thank you very much, and I hope you find this document useful.